Halifax Harbor, Nova Scotia. Ian stepped in front of Amy. He didn't look at the muzzle of the gun. He looked at Atlas's face, his cold eyes. This wasn't a threat. He wasn't trying to scare them. This was real. "Just a moment," Ian said. "We have a deal." Atlas's lip curled. "Do you think I'd allow a bunch of kids to threaten me? Know my business? We might know your business better than you do. We have reason to believe your ship is booby-trapped. When it gets into the harbor, it will explode." "Right. And all the mermaids will drown, and the unicorns will save them. Kid, I don't have time for this. I run a billion-dollar operation. Do you understand? You're in my way, and you know too much. All of you, kneel down, in a line, facing away from me. Hands on top of your heads. He's going to execute us, one by one." Ian could taste his own fear, acrid in his mouth. He felt suddenly lightheaded, yet at the same time everything was so clear. Possibilities whipped through his head at lightning speed. He saw pitfalls and dangers and outcomes. None of them were good. He could also feel his friends behind him, breathing, scared, ready. The unsteady pitch of the deck underneath his feet, the fog leaving droplets on his cheeks. Life was so big and so close, it seemed impossible that this could be happening. Amy stood slightly behind him, muscles coiled, waiting for an opening. He knew she was ready to strike. Ham was to his left. Dan's eyes were darting from the gun to the entrance between him and Atlas. They were each ready to rush the guy with the gun, which was exactly what could get them all killed. Ian had never been so afraid in his life, but he had just gone through every possibility in this scenario and rejected them all, except for one. Atlas didn't know who he was dealing with. Not just kids, but trained, strong attackers. Amy was a black belt, and Hamilton could probably bench press a car to protect his friends. Dan was fearless and quick. If Atlas killed Ian, that would give the others enough time to rush him, get the gun. They'd only have a second, maybe two, but that was all they needed. And Atlas would never expect kids to be that fast. "I'm not kneeling down," he said. Amy drew in a sharp breath. "No, Ian," she breathed behind him. She knew what he was thinking. He wasn't the self-sacrificing sort, but Atlas had placed him in that position. Atlas swung the gun toward Ian's temple. "Fine," he said. "You first." He stared into Atlas's eyes. He saw no compassion, no mercy, just a willingness to get the job done. Behind Atlas's head, a freighter moved toward the harbor. Their boat was angled parallel. That meant the wake would hit them broadside, which would give him one last chance, if he could stall. "Before you do, you should listen," Ian said. "We have absolute evidence that the ship is rigged to explode. I have it right on my phone. Let me show you. If you don't look, you'll regret it." "I never regret anything," Atlas said. "And if the ship blows, no one can connect me with it." "We can," Amy said. "But you'll be dead, kid," Atlas said. He flourished the gun. Didn't you get the memo? The wave hit. Ian had watched it come over Atlas's shoulder, rolling across the dark water. He was braced and ready. The boat was lifted and pitched, and Atlas staggered. It was all they needed. Ian slammed into Atlas, aiming his hand in a lethal chop to the man's throat. Meanwhile, Amy went in close with a roundhouse kick right at Atlas's wrist. Ian could have sworn he heard the crack of bone, and Atlas howled. The gun went skittering on the deck, and Dan dove for it. Hamilton crashed into a tottering Atlas with the full force of his body. Dan threw the gun overboard. Atlas struggled to get clear of Hamilton. He broke free and barreled down the steps into the cabin. Ian realized he must have another weapon down there. "Let's go," Ian shouted. He hit the winch that lowered the dinghy down and flipped the ladder over the side. "Move!" Amy climbed down the ladder and threw herself in. Dan followed. "Ham, come on!" Ian shouted. He wouldn't leave this deck until Ham was safely on the dinghy. Ham had one foot over the railing as Atlas charged back up the deck, holding a gun. The crack of the gun exploded over Ian's head as Ham scooped up the anchor and threw it. It connected with Atlas's head, and he collapsed onto the deck with a thunk. Ham vaulted off the railing and into the dinghy. Ian was right behind him. "Now!" Ian shouted, and with a mighty heave, Hamilton pushed them off. The current drove them out, skimming over the chop. Amy shipped the oars and began to row as hard as she could. The fog wrapped around them. "We made it," Ian said. The blast of a ship's horn made them jump. "We're in the middle of the shipping channel, with fog rolling in and a storm coming," Dan said through chattering teeth, "and the current is pulling us out into the North Atlantic. But you can't have everything." "We all did splendidly back there," Ian said. "Now let's get ourselves to shore. Amy, I have the greatest confidence in your muscles, but perhaps Hamilton should row." "Which direction?" Hamilton asked. Ian looked around. He could see nothing. No lights, no buoys, no stars. The fog was so thick now it obscured every landmark. They could no longer distinguish the sea from the sky. It was all gray. Thick, impenetrable gray, with the cold black sea all around them, and darkness falling. "That is indeed the question," he said, which was exactly when a loud blast from a ship's horn reverberated across the water. Ian felt it as pressure in his ears and chest. Now they could feel the vibration of the great, powerful engines.